everybody, I'm Tara and this is my reading wrap-up for the months of June and July. So yeah, we're already more than halfway through August and I'm only just getting to my June and July wrap-up. Oops! And I only have 5 books to talk about today, but I have a lot to say about them, so let's get started. The first book I read in June was Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. You guys all know what this is about by now, but just for the sake of completion, it is about a gay teenage boy who is on the verge of being outed while he's also falling in love with a boy he knows only as Blue, who he's been talking to and building a relationship with through anonymous emails. I had pretty high expectations for this book because all over BookTube, everyone loves this book. You just hear about it all the time. It is so hyped, it is so beloved, so I really hoped that I would love it as well. And I did really love the aspect of Blue, the whole mystery of who Blue is, and trying to figure it out. Every time a guy's name was mentioned, I was like, oh, I bet it's him. And I did have one big suspicion throughout most of the book, which ended up being wrong, but once Blue really started dropping clues, I figured it out pretty quick, and I was happy with who he ended up being in the end. But aside from that, I just thought the rest of the book was okay. The blurb right here says this is the love child of John Green and Rainbow Rowell, and I highly disagree with that. I think John Green and Rainbow Rowell both have a writing style that is much more like adult fiction. It doesn't read like YA at all, whereas Becky Albertalli's writing, I think, is very bare bones, it's very on the surface. It's exactly what I think of when I think of YA. John Green and Rainbow Rowell get you into the head of their characters a lot more. I didn't really get a feel for who Simon was throughout this whole book. I thought he was very one-dimensional. A good one-dimensional, he was a good character, but I just didn't feel like we got as deep as we could have. And with a book that deals with the issue of self-identity, with Simon trying to embrace who he is, I think Becky Albertalli really missed some opportunities to dive deep into the theme of self-identity, especially when you compare it to Rainbow Rowell's Fangirl, which does an excellent job of delving into its protagonist's growth and evolution. I also thought this book set a lot of things up without really following through on them, like Taylor jumping to Simon's defense for seemingly no reason. I thought that was gonna go somewhere, but it didn't. And when Blue thought that Simon only liked him because he thought he was somebody else, I could hear Simon's response in my head, no, I only liked him because I thought he was you. But Simon never said that. There was a whole conversation there that could have been had that was never had. And then Simon's bonding with his sisters over all the secrets that they had, that they were sharing with each other. So much more could have been done with that. And Simon never really had that rock bottom moment that you need to see your protagonist have before things start getting better. Even though he alienated all of his friends and he potentially lost Blue, that rock bottom moment never came. And super unpopular opinion time, I really did not like the character of Leah. She rubbed me the wrong way so hard. I got tired of her insecurity and her jealousy so fast, and I especially hated how much of a bitch she was to Abby. And Abby seems like a genuinely nice person. She was sweet to Leah even when Leah was treating her like garbage. I have zero interest in reading Leah on the Offbeat. I might continue with the series if other books follow Simon or some of his other friends, but nope, will not be reading Leah. I did watch the Love, Simon movie after I read this, and in some ways it really improved on the book, I think. Like Leah, for one. Leah was so much better in the movie than she was in the book, and I really loved seeing Simon's relationship with his parents. Who didn't cry during those scenes? But in other ways it was a step down from the book, like the carnival scene at the end. I don't know what they did with that, but it was beautiful in the book. It was just not in the movie. All in all, I give Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda 3 stars. Sadly, it just did not live up to the hype for me. I liked it, I enjoyed reading it, but is it going to stick with me forever and ever? Probably not. Next up is Prince Lestat, the 11th book of the Vampire Chronicles series, and in this book, everyone's favorite vampire, Lestat, starts to hear a strange voice in his head, and he finds out that other vampires all around the world are hearing the voice as well, and is convincing some of them to massacre others. So all the ancients come together to try to figure out who this voice is, what it wants, and how to stop it before it can completely eradicate the entire vampire race. So I am a plot-driven reader. I need a good story in my stories, and while I was reading Prince Lestat, I made the discovery that Anne Rice's novels are character-driven novels. Looking back on the rest of the Vampire Chronicles series, I don't know how I didn't realize this before. Maybe it was just because when I was young, in my late teens and early 20s and starting to read that series, I didn't know what a character-driven story versus a plot-driven story was. There is a plot in this book, as the summary would suggest, but it accounted for very, very few of the almost 600 pages of this book. It was mostly backstory of characters, both old and new, and mostly backstory that we didn't need to know about characters that didn't need to be there to appreciate the actual plot. And as for that plot, I figured out the identity of the voice maybe a third of the way through. A little too early for my liking. I like being surprised. I like having twists come at me out of nowhere. But I did like who the voice ended up being. That was probably my favorite part of this book. I liked that we got the backstory for that particular character, that we got to find out more about them, because it was a character that throughout the Vampire Chronicles I always wanted to know more about. So I am happy that we finally got that with Prince Lestat. But I was really not happy with how fanfiction-y this book seemed. First, there's Victor, and I cannot explain why I hate the whole Victor thing without being spoilery, so this is your spoiler warning. If you don't want to know details about this book, just mute the video or fast forward until the spoiler warning that I will put here goes away. Okay, so Victor is Lestat's son. And at first I thought they were trying to say that Lestat had unknowingly knocked up some girl 300 years ago before he became a vampire, and it took almost 300 years for that son to finally find him. But the actual story is way more ridiculous. Lestat did unknowingly knock some girl up, but it only happened about 20 years ago during a science experiment that Lestat was lured into, in which a cocktail of chemicals basically made his body human again, and it made him able to have sex again, and it made him able to, oops, make a baby. I was having major Harry Potter and the Cursed Child flashbacks, you guys. I mean, take a major character who in canon never had and would never have had a kid and give him a kid. That's like basically every bad fan fiction you've ever read, right? As soon as Victor came on the scene, I was pretty much done with this book. I almost DNF'd it right then and there, but for the love that I've held for the Vampire Chronicles, and for Lestat especially, for so long, I stuck through with it, I got to the end, and I think that was a mistake. The most fanfiction-y aspect of this book was the absolute Gary Stewification of Lestat. In the early books of the series, Lestat was a deeply flawed character, and he owned it, he embraced it. He was not a good person, and most of the time he didn't try to be. And somehow you loved him for it. But this book put him on the highest pedestal that you could possibly imagine. The other characters all pretty much worshipped him, even characters that hated him in previous books of the series. And the ending, oh, the ending. If Anne Rice's main goal with this book was to make Lestat the biggest Gary Stew in the history of literature, good job, Anne. You did it. As you might be able to tell, I did not like Prince Lestat, and honestly, I regret reading it. I really can't give this book any more than 2 stars, and I'm very sad to say I will not be continuing with the Vampire Chronicles series from here on in. I will eventually reread the first few books of the series and just pretend that Prince Lestat doesn't exist. Oh, speaking of which, one more thing I do want to mention is that Prince Lestat acts as though Blood Canticle never existed. Rowan Mayfair, Quinn Blackwood, the Teltos, none of it is even hinted at in Prince Lestat. It's hilarious. It's like Anne Rice knew what a bad finale that was to the series, so she tried to just erase that and redo it with this. And somehow it's even worse. Next up is a book that you probably can't see because of all the glare, but hopefully you can see it. It is Room by Emma Donoghue. And this book is about a 5-year-old boy named Jack, who, along with his mother, has been held captive in the same room for all of his life. That room is all that he knows. He has no idea there's a whole other world out there. But as he's growing older, he's asking questions, and it's only a matter of time before he finds out the truth. I have a 2-year-old son, so I knew that this was going to be a difficult book for me to read, but it was actually a lot harder than I even expected. I was tearing up by about page 40, and about halfway through the book, bawled my eyes out, like ugly crying, bawled my eyes out. The story is told from Jack's point of view, so there are these little games that from his eyes seem like just little games, but you eventually realize that it's actually his mother's attempts at trying to get someone on the outside to hear them and to rescue them, or ways that she's trying to protect him from the man who's holding them captive. As a mom, all day long, you are making up little games to help the day go by easier, but it's usually things like picking up your toys or washing your hands or going to the grocery store. So to think of trying to do that, to make a game out of trying to scream for help or trying to hide my son from a man who might hurt him, that's just so incredibly horrifying. And as a mom, you want to do everything you possibly can to protect your kids and to keep them safe. But how can you do that when your whole life is being controlled by a monster who could come in at any point and take your child away from you, or who might stop bringing you food, or who might get tired of abusing you and turn to your son instead? It's just so far beyond horrifying. There's no words to describe how horrifying the thought of that is. But even though it was really horrifying, I was absolutely riveted for the first half of this book. After that, it became almost entirely a character-driven story, and as I said before, I just don't really like character-driven stories, so at that point my interest did start to fade. That second half dragged on so long. I think it could have been condensed down to the last quarter of the book maybe, and the whole thing would have been a lot better balanced. I also want to mention the writing style. The book is told from the point of view from a 5-year-old, and it is honestly one of the most realistic and believable depictions of a child's voice that I've ever read in a book before. I can see how some people would hate it because it's a little much. It is the entire book, there's no break from it, and it's strange and confusing. But I didn't have a hard time picking it up. I understood almost everything that he was saying. Maybe because I have a 2-year-old who speaks in 1 and 2 word sentences, so this was actually an upgrade from that. Overall, I would rate Room 4 stars. That's averaged out from a 5-star beginning and a 3-star ending. I would recommend this book if you do like character-driven novels, but I wouldn't recommend it if you have children and you cannot handle stories about children or parents in horrifying situations, because it's honestly going to give you nightmares. Next up is Origen by Dan Brown. This was actually the last book that I read in July, but I'd like this wrap up to end on a high note, and this is not going to be a high note. In Origen, futurist and inventor Edmund Kirsch claims to have discovered the origin of life and where that life is headed, but before he can unveil his findings, he's assassinated. And Robert Langdon and this novel's token female sidekick have to try to find a way to reveal Edmund's discovery while running for their lives from the people who want to bury it. If you were just wondering why nothing was happening, or when something was going to happen, or if you were really bored and you considered turning off the video, you now have a very slight idea of how I felt the entire time I was reading this book. Origen is 456 pages long. The inciting incident doesn't happen until page 107. 107 pages of descriptions of rooms at the Guggenheim Museum, and of modern art pieces, and of Robert Langdon remembering conversations he once had with Edmund Kirsch, and a full dissertation of the rise and fall of gods throughout history, and all the pomp and circumstance of this big presentation that you never actually get to see happen. And then, after you finally get to that inciting incident, it doesn't really incite anything. Nothing else happens for the next 280 pages. I gotta put this down. It's a chunker, it hurts. More than just physically, it actually hurts my heart that I read this book. I've read and enjoyed both Angels and Demons and The Da Vinci Code, which are the first 2 books of the Robert Langdon series, and I remember both of them kicking off really quick with the action, and then the action never really stopping. Robert was always finding clues and solving clues and digging deeper and unraveling layer after layer of this mystery that he was chasing, so I expected a similar ride from Origen. But there was exactly one layer to the mystery in Origen. Robert Langdon had to find Edmund Kirsch's computer password. Okay, and I guess he also had to figure out where the computer was to put the password into, but that took literally 1 page to do, so 279 pages of Robert Langdon trying to figure out a password. I very nearly DNF'd this book, but I was genuinely interested to know what this grand discovery of Edmund's was, so I just started skimming or skipping the chapters that dealt with the sad excuses for subplots that were somehow even less interesting than Robert's search for a password. But honestly, I started skimming a lot of Robert's chapters too. And you know what? I shouldn't have bothered, because that grand discovery, the incredible answer to where life came from and where it was going, I've heard it before. There was nothing original about it. There was nothing groundbreaking. There was nothing earth-shattering. There was nothing worth wasting my time trying to find out. I also very nearly gave Origen a 1-star rating, but I've only ever given one book a 1-star rating, and that book is 50 Shades of Grey, which I loathe with the heat of 1,000 suns. And even though Origen was pretty bad, it wasn't 50 Shades of Grey bad. So 2 stars it is. This was honestly one of the most boring books I've ever read in my life, and I don't think I would recommend it to anyone. Like I said, I did enjoy the first couple books in the Robert Langdon series, but after reading this one, there's no way I'm continuing with that series. And now for that high note that I promised, Gemina by Amie Kaufman and J. Kristoff, the second book in the Illuminae Files series, which is a YA sci-fi slash horror slash thriller series that's told in a mixed media format through IMs and chats and incident reports and surveillance transcripts and all that good stuff. Gemina follows 2 new characters, Hannah and Nick, who are aboard the Heimdall station, which is currently being overtaken by Baytech, and there's also some alien predators running around, and oh yeah, there's some wormhole malfunctions that might just tear the entire space-time continuum apart. I was blown away by how much I loved Illuminae, and you know what? I love Gemina even more. I was a little worried about leaving behind all the characters that we knew and loved from Illuminae and starting over with new characters and new conflicts, but I shouldn't have been worried because I loved Hannah and Nick right from the start. I actually ended up liking Hannah and Nick more than Katie and Ezra, and I loved the whole game of cat and mouse that they were playing with the Baytech people throughout the whole thing, and oh my god, the Lanima. Once again, I was completely taken by surprise by the horror element of this book that no one ever mentions, and this time it was a predatory parasite. You guys know how much I love parasites, so when they started slithering into the room, oh my god, I just lost it. I was in love. I loved it so much. Gemina didn't have a huge mind-blowing twist like Illuminae did, but the entire Gemina particle thing was mind-blowing. I loved the idea of it. I loved how it was executed, especially the format of the story, how it was told at that point, just brilliant. And even though we were in a new location with new characters, we did still get to see a little bit of the characters from Illuminae, and more than a little bit of my personal favorite character in the entire series, Aiden. I think I actually squealed in glee when Aiden popped back into the story. What else can I really say about Gemina? It was incredible. It was amazing. I love it so much. The only reason I'm giving Gemina 5 stars is that my rating system doesn't go any higher than that, but honestly, this book deserves way more than 5 stars. So those were the 5 books that I read in June and July. A couple of downs, but one really great up. So it kind of balances itself out. If you read any of these books, let me know what you thought about them. I'm especially interested to hear anything that might redeem Origen or Prince Lestat even a little bit for me. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and if you liked the video, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more. And until next time, happy reading, everybody. Bye-bye.